Well, good evening, everyone. It's day 10 here in Las Vegas, Nevada, in the court case for the Bundys. And I'm going to bring on, here in a moment, Kelli Stewart. We're going to bring her on for an update for Portland here. So give us just a minute. We'll try to have you a pretty detailed update tonight. Let's see here. See if we get this here. Give me just a second. I'm not for sure how I'm doing this wrong here, but give me a moment here. I'm on. There we go. I still haven't figured out how to join these live streams properly, so.
We're learning. We're learning.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to give a better update tonight on everything. It's a little easier to sit down and go over our notes than being out along the street where there's so much traffic, and sometimes, hello, Todd Engel, how you doing? Todd Engel's family's on here watching, so give you an update on Darryl Thorne, his sentencing today. Kelly's got all the update on that. I really haven't even heard yet. I've been in court all day. Kelly, would you like to go ahead and start first?
Mine might be a little lengthy, John, so if I can, but
okay.
If for the viewers who are wanting information about Nevada, if you want to give us a rundown too on Nevada, it's up to you. I can go first, but it might take me 15 or 20 minutes. There was a lot that happened. It was a 3-hour hearing for Darryl.
Wow.
So
I know I tried to call you at lunchtime and I couldn't get through to you at all. So I'll go ahead and start on what happened today here, and then afterwards we'll go into Darryl Thorne's end.
Okay.
Because here today, we started out with Ryan Norwood. Given renewed motions, had some questions on some old motions that hadn't been answered, and all these objections back and forth that the government had brought in. We did not have no jurors in the courtroom at all until after lunch, not even the witness. So these witnesses, we have 4 witnesses waiting out in the lobby. No witnesses and no jurors until after lunchtime. It was all argument.
So I thought there were no jurors the entire day.
No, we actually got them to come in about 12:45 is when they actually came into the courtroom and started listening to the witness that we're still on witness number 2. So yesterday, Mr. Whipple, he questioned this Terry Petrie all day long yesterday afternoon, just all over and over, just question him and just asking him all kinds of questions. So he had to still finish up with this witness today. So Mr. Whipple got to go ahead and finish up with his questioning of Mr. Petrie, and then we had Dan Hill start questioning him, and there's an interesting thing that happened there. After Whipple was done and Dan Hill got up there, I don't know if this Mr. Petrie had been told or informed of Philpott or not, Morgan Philpott, but as soon as Dan Hill comes up there, he asked Dan Hill a question. The witness says, "Are you Mr. Philpott?" That's what he asked. And kind of everybody kind of looked at each other. The way the question was asked, he was like trying to figure out who Mr. Philpott was, because this witness is not in the room. He's in a back room. He don't know what's going on in the courtroom. He's brought in. And Dan Hill answered it very well. He didn't even say nothing about Philpott. He just goes, "No, I'm Dan Hill. I'm Ammon Bundy's attorney." And the guy kind of looked shocked. And he said, "Oh, okay. Nice to meet you, Mr. Hill." And then they proceeded, and Dan Hill did quite well, asking this witness just tons of questions concerning the standoff and this guy's involvement as an attorney. Why was he brought in? And I tell you what, these attorneys the last 2 days have done miracles in this courtroom. We started out with objections yesterday from the prosecution, which are not really supposed to. Today, we got almost no objections at all. They was literally silent in the courtroom. After Dan Hill, I guess the highlight of this day is after Dan Hill got done with this Mr. Petrie, he sat down and Ryan Bundy got up. And Ryan Bundy gave us a 2.5 educational constitutional class in the courtroom today with this witness. And awesome. I'm only going to barely touch on it today, but first thing he does is he starts questioning this man. He's a 35-year-old lawyer. He asks him a couple of questions. He said, "Did you take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States?" Mm-hmm. And Mr. Petrie said, "Yes, I did. I was in the Air Force for like 14 years, and I had to take an oath. And I've been an attorney for 35 years. So this guy's a seasoned attorney. He's a federal seasoned attorney. He's been working for the federal government for over 35 years. That's a long time to be an attorney. Yeah. But the biggest point is he took an oath to the Constitution. Ryan Bundy asked him, "Do you know what the Constitution says?" The guy kind of sat there for a minute and said, "I don't." That's the problem with our country right now is we've got government employees, federal officers that have taken an oath to uphold something they don't even know what it says. This guy's been working for the federal government for 35 years, and he doesn't even know the Constitution. So Ryan Bundy, in the next 2.5 hours, educated the jurors and all of us. And I tell you what, the prosecution, they was literally over there dying, trying to hold themselves back from objection. Mr. Stephen Myrie, he was literally there like this, tapping his ink pen on the table for I don't know, sometimes a half hour at a time. Dan Shees literally had his hands in his face, and then he would be like, making ugly faces and trying to oh, this is just disgusting. And he was just so upset that he wanted to shut Ryan Bundy up so bad, but he did not. And Ryan Bundy at one point took his Constitution out of his pocket. And this Constitution, it's well worn. If anybody sees it right now, this Constitution that Ryan Bundy has, it's probably been with him for a long time here in jail. It's probably something that he has cherished, and it's well marked, and I mean, it looks like it's been worn a long time. But he took that Constitution, and he says, "May I approach the witness, Your Honor?" And she said yes. And he went up there and he gave the Constitution to the witness. And he said, "I want you to read out of this." And he took him step by step through all of the Constitution. And he asked him, "Is this what it says here about the federal government owning lands?" And he said, "Yes. But the federal government doesn't have to obey by the Constitution." This is the kind of stuff this guy was saying today.
Good.
That
That's
the federal
good stuff.
government is, he took an oath to uphold it, but he doesn't have to obey by it. But they went by step, and they went by the brand inspector. He said, "What with the brand inspector in Nevada, that a court order had to be given before this brand inspector could give you permission to sell my father's cows." Who does he work for? He said, "The state of Nevada." So the brand inspector works for the state of Nevada. He says, "What does the state of Nevada Constitution say about brand inspectors and cows?" It says you have to get a competent ruling by a state court, pretty much. They didn't have a right, the federal government. Ryan Bundy proved that the federal government had no right to even get an injunction against Cliven Bundy. The brand inspector had no right to even give them permission to sell the cows.
Without the state giving the permission.
The state had to give the permission. The federal government did not have a right. This same witness with Mr. Whipple yesterday, he said that he didn't even need the state's permission to sell those cows or impound them, that he could do it on his own, but he just wanted to do it for the procedure part of it. So that's the only reason they even did it. But necessarily, they didn't need the right. These these federal officers, they don't recognize state power. They don't recognize state authority. And they're complaining about Ryan Bundy that doesn't recognize federal authority.
Yeah, so I'll say something to that. The reason to the viewers that this is so important, to people who say, well, the federal government has more authority than the state, and that's just how it is, and we're happy with that. What you need to understand is that the state is where the people's power comes from. Those are the elected officials that we have elected to represent we the people. And when they don't do their job, we can recall them. There's a wonderful process that we can actually take to remove people from office who are not actually representing the people. Now, do we do it often enough? Absolutely not. We should literally be doing it every day at this point with how things are going in our country. So the fact that people say that the federal government serves the state, is that static on your end?
No, it's not on my end.
Okay, I thought I heard some static.
I can hear you real clear.
What the people are essentially saying is that they're okay not having a voice in this country. When people say, oh, the feds always have jurisdiction over the states, you're saying you're okay going back under the authority that our founding fathers broke free of. Our founding fathers broke free of the idea that we were going to live under a king. And they said the people are now essentially going to be the voice, and they are going to be the ones in power over their elected officials to make sure the elected officials are representing them. With federal, they're all appointed. There is nothing we can do about Judge Navarro to remove her. I'm getting a lot of static back on my line, and I have no idea why. I've never heard it before. You can't hear that, John?
No, I can't hear it on this end. You're coming in real clear here.
Okay. So when John is saying this important piece that Cliven is trying to really get through to people, and Ammon and Ryan are trying to get through to people, it's because without the states having the authority, you have no authority over your country. You have no authority. Your voice doesn't count. In the federal government, your voice doesn't count. In the state government, your voice does count. Those people are elected versus appointed. So that's a really big deal that they're trying to drive home.
They definitely are. And he talked about that today. He talked about why we left England and why we established here and all of our rights and how the Constitution came about before there was ever a federal government. And that we the people, we're the ones that set up the federal government, not to them to be dictators over us. And this was all brought up in the court today to the jurors. This is probably the best I've ever seen it in any of these lawyers. These lawyers were amazed today. They've never seen anything like this. The courtroom, you could hear a pin drop again. This is the second time in this trial, so we're at day 10. When Ryan Bundy gave his opening statements at the very beginning, it was a good solid 60 seconds after he got done then before anybody spoke. The room was silent. Same thing today. Literally after this hearing was over with Ryan asking, and he's not done yet. We're coming back tomorrow for court. But as soon as Ryan finished today, everything got real quiet. And she dismissed the jurors, and then she just quietly turned to Ryan and she says, while you were doing your cross-examination here of this witness, I made a call to your pretrial release. Excuse me. And she says, I went a little bit further, and I'm going to let you go home for Thanksgiving out to Mesquite to your family. She says, and I don't want you driving home Thursday night after visiting your family. I want you to stay out there. So I actually went a step further then too to let you stay out there. So Ryan, I mean, he's brave. He doesn't care. He's gonna ask for a little bit more. He always has. Your Honor, I think we should be released. I should get to go home. I mean, he's been doing this all along, very professionally and very polite.
Yeah,
well, he turns to the judge and he says, well, Your Honor, I'd like to put in a motion for me to just go ahead and stay the whole weekend. She said, well, let's just take one day at a time. Monday, we will address that for next weekend. So he said, well, thank you, ma'am. So
I've really appreciated Whipple through this trial. I know that there was a lot of discussion, about getting him removed. And I was mentioning this to one of the wives the other day. I said, isn't it just amazing how God is orchestrating this legal team together? And, you know, Ryan Payne could have pled out multiple times, and he had a lot of pressure on him to plead out and to, you know, get away from this trial. And he stuck with it. And his team is just awesome. And then you have Whipple, who was actually fired at one point and is still here. You have Morgan and Rick, who we didn't even know if Rick would be able to come because of his own trial down in Utah. Up in Utah. And how this team has come together has just, they're all working together so well. And I'm just so pleased with how they're doing. They're really doing awesome.
It really is. And Ryan Payne's attorneys, he's got 2 attorneys. Ammon Bundy's got 2 attorneys at his table. And then we've got Cliven with his attorney and Ryan representing himself with just a co-counsel. So we've got this awesome team that has really pulled together in unity and are fighting together. Each one of them are protecting each other. I noticed the day Ryan was trying to get something across, and Ryan Norwood, Ryan Payne's attorney, stands up and interjects and helps him. And the judge had made a ruling today on they wasn't supposed to bring up any more water rights today, not in front of the jurors. No more water rights. Stay away from the water rights. But Ryan Norwood, he gets up and in his cross-examination of this witness, he asked about the court orders. He says in the court orders, did it include anything about any of the range improvements? Or it was just about cows, impounding cows. And these range improvements, that's a big word because that was water rights out there, fixing the water tanks, water pipes. He said, did that include removing or damaging or destroying any range improvements? And this attorney says no. He says, did it include anything with pipes or that had water in them? And the attorney says no. So they go a little, they're beating around the bush about it because they're not supposed to talk about the water rights to these jurors, but they're asking if these court orders included any of this, and it didn't. It clearly did not. And these BLM officers, they damaged 10 miles of water lines. I went up there myself. I've walked some of this a couple of different times, and they tore up all this water rights that the Bundys had without any court order. They did it without a warrant, and they did it maliciously and destroyed all this property. And now most of it's fixed back, but it is at the cost of the Bundy family.
And let's point out right now that a lot of people have seen, it's gone viral, the video of Margaret Houston being thrown to the ground, Ammon Bundy being tased, I think either twice or 3 times, if I'm remembering correctly. It might have even been 3 times that he was tased, but they were standing right in front of a big dump truck where all of these altercations happen. The reason the altercations happen is because the protesters were trying to understand what was in these dump trucks that were coming out of the fields. And in fact, they were full of all of their water lines that they had been using their tractors and backhoes and pulling them out of the ground and putting them in these trucks and trying to get them out of there so that no matter what happened, Cliven would not be able to graze his cattle on this land because they wouldn't have water. When you're out in the desert over thousands of acres, your cows can't just travel home every single night to get water. So these water rights are a really big deal. And all they were trying to do is trying to understand what the BLM was doing because they believed that they were up to no good and they were doing things they did not have a court order to do. And they wanted to just simply see what was in this truck. And that is when Ammon was tased and Margaret Houston was thrown to the ground and the attack dogs were set out onto the people.
It doesn't make sense to go round up cows and have dump trucks and backhoes and all this type of equipment when I guarantee you the Bundy family would have took a dozen cowboys at the most and went up and rounded those 350 plus cows up without killing any in less time and less money than what the BLM did. They took a long time, spent almost $1 million rounding up cows, and then the millions of dollars they're spending now. It's like Mr. Whipple has pointed out over and over again yesterday in the day. This is definitely a case of entrapment. They entrapped the Bundys, they set them up, and what we are seeing now the last 2 days in court coming out with Mrs. Nadia Omed, being there on the ground. And 2 years prior, she was working for the Department of Interior against the Bundys, and now she's prosecuting the Bundys, and it's in a separate case. One's civil and one's criminal. There's something wrong with this big picture. It really is.
And that's so important also to take note of, because these charges are all about impeding, assaulting, intimidating, threatening, and brandishing weapons in a crime, in the event of a crime. And so it's really important who the aggressor is. And while some people don't understand how important this is, I want to elaborate on it. Because of the snipers that were up on the hill, that up until all this trial, absolutely denied of the government that they had snipers days before up on the hill. The reason that's important is because when you look at situations like Waco and Ruby Ridge, and you see people that were just trying to defend themselves and were literally surrounded by federal agents, and their lives were threatened, and in fact their lives were lost. In Ruby Ridge, the wife was shot in the head while she was holding her baby. I mean, it's hard to discuss, but we can't forget about the lives that have been lost at the hands of our government when they are going in, just like they went into with Waco, because they said they had guns that they didn't think they were supposed to have. All of those lives, was it 92 lives that were lost in Waco? Something like that. A lot of lives were lost in Waco.
It was real close to that number.
Because the federal government came in heavy-handed just like this and said, we think you have guns you're not supposed to have, and we're willing to kill you to make sure you don't have guns you're not. And just think about that logic when we're all talking about gun safety and gun control. Our government will kill you if they think you have guns you shouldn't have. So who really needs the gun control? The people or the federal government? So when the Bundys are able to now in this trial prove that the federal government was actually the aggressor in this situation, you then look at all the charges that were applied to the Bundys and their protesters, and you see they actually belong on the behalf of the BLM. The BLM came out to assault, to intimidate, to impede them from using the land that they had rights to use. They literally came out believing that they were going to shoot these people, and we've heard that on the head cams that the videos that have been released, where they were picking and choosing who they would shoot first and who was overweight and what dog they would take out. All the charges that have been given to these protesters and to the Bundys literally belong in the hands of the aggressor, and the aggressor is always the person who throws the first punch. I don't care what uniform you're wearing. In America, we have the right to defend ourselves. And so if somebody comes to your home and points a gun at you and you think you're about to die or your children are about to die, the natural response is to ask for help and to defend yourself. And that's exactly what the Bundys and their protesters did. So this isn't about cows. All these charges are truly charges that belong back on the BLM because they did what they accused all of these other people of doing.
Exactly. And another point that has been brought up in two prior cases here in the last two trials is that how the sheriff actually told Cliven Bundy publicly on video that the BLM was giving the cows back. They was standing down, and nobody was even over there at the impoundment site. They were miles away, and they wouldn't even went over there if it hadn't have been for the sheriff telling them that they was going to stand down. When you think about it, you got 350 thirsty, hungry cows with calves that are probably separated from their mothers, and these cows are wild. They are ready to stampede. They need water. They need somewhere to get them, and those cows had to be cared for. If the BLM was honestly standing down like the sheriff said, Cliven needed to be over there to take his cows into possession to help them get back to water. They wasn't doing anything wrong. The people went over there because the sheriff said it's over with. They're standing down. They went over there, and the BLMs had guns pointing at those people. The videos have proven it in the last two trials, and the videos are going to prove it again in this trial.
Yeah, and I hope that after this trial wraps up, our hope, this isn't going to end until the end of February. It could even go on as far as March, and then 30 days later, the next trial is supposed to start for the final defendants. And our hope and our prayer is that with these acquittals that are coming, the last group would be completely, all their charges would be dismissed. But then we know we have to go back in for Todd Engel and Greg Burleson because their convictions were absolutely unfounded. They were not based on any evidence. In fact, they were based on the evidence that wasn't allowed in the courtroom. There was so much those jurors weren't allowed to know that I'm praying, and I'll continue petitioning to people out there. I know we have an attorney right now that's been willing to take on Todd Engel's appeal, but to any attorneys out there listening, Greg Burleson is blind, and Greg Burleson is not guilty as he was charged. He was sentenced to 68 years in prison. That's a life sentence. And so we would ask anybody out there who has connections to bring those in to help as this trial goes on and these acquittals come, to go back in and not forget about those who have been wrongfully convicted, like Greg Burleson and Todd Engel.
And we've got we have Jerry DeLoomis that's serving 8 years. That none of these guys, Todd Engel and Greg Burleson, did not get a fair trial. I was sitting there in that trial. They did not get a fair trial. They did not get the witnesses that they wanted to call. They didn't get the testimonies in. Only thing that was done there is lies from the government, and the government suppressed evidence, suppressed things that needed to be brought in, and those attorneys tried. They really tried. They worked for the government, and they tried as hard as they could to get stuff in, and the judge kept telling them, no, you're not going to bring that in. But we're seeing the difference in these attorneys. These attorneys are prepared to get tased.
Yes, these attorneys are prepared to get tased. And while I'll say their attorneys did well, I will say Greg Burleson's attorney did not fight for him. He had so much he could have used to help discredit the Longbow video that they pulled up that he didn't use. There were so many areas that things were dropped, and it's hard for the American people to understand that an attorney truly can make it or break it. To the people out there who say you don't win things based on attorneys, God has to intervene in these courts because they're corrupt. But if you don't have an attorney who's even willing to fight, you really have virtually no chance at escaping the wrath of the federal government. They have too many resources, their attorneys are too good, and they are willing to fight tooth and nail for that conviction. And the court-appointed attorneys, just up to this point, have not been willing to get tased or to put their life and their livelihood on the line for their defendants. So that's why there's a big hats off to Ryan Payne's attorney now, because they are fighting even though they are court-appointed.
I seen someone here said we needed to appeal it. Well, Greg Burleson needs to appeal it. So does Todd Engel when he gets sentenced or whatever it is. They need to appeal it. But the wheels of justice turn so slow on these appeals. It takes years. Joe Robertson will go back some of these cases that I've been following really closely lately, and there's so many cases, more than just his. But Joe Robertson, he's in a halfway house about to get released. He's been released from prison, and he's still waiting on the decision of his appeal. After almost 2 years, we've got Schaefer Cox, 5 years he waited for an appeal, and he finally got an appeal heard. You will sit there and you will rot in prison before these appeals heard. We got Jeff Winehouse. We've got Yori Call. Most people probably on here don't even know who Yori Call is. I've been following Yori Call and his family for years, since I've been a young child, 15 years old or younger. I've been following Yori Call. He's been in prison now, guys, 30 years fighting appeals. 30 years. And he was set up just the same as a lot of these other people were. These kind of things shouldn't happen in the United States. If you don't have money, you don't get your appeals like you should. And it takes years to get heard. And you may just die in prison waiting on these appeals.
Yeah, well, we look at all the other people that have been rounded up since the Bundy Ranch and the refuge. People like Thomas Lacavera, who wasn't arrested at the refuge, but he was arrested for a gun charge for having a gun at the refuge. And they arrested him after the fact. And Skylar Barbeau, they went after, and Bill Keebler, they went after. And you see that when people take a stand against the government, that they end up suffering in the long run. I mean, look at what Marcus Mumford has gone through. Look at what Rick Kerber has gone through. And these are attorneys that are fighting. Anybody who stands up against this giant ends up suffering. Look at the things we've suffered, just our time and our energy and our sleep and our finances and our family time. You don't go up against the giant without having some form of sacrifice being involved in that. And it's really heartbreaking, because at some point it just feels like, when will it end? When will the list end? When will the sacrifice end? And that's where I go back to saying our appeal is to heaven, and we need God to intervene on this country. I saw some of that today in Darryl Thorne's hearing I'll talk about later, but we need God back in the lives of these people, and we definitely need him in our courtroom.
We definitely do. Going to Darryl Thorne there, I know that you was there and you said it took 3 hours today for his his sentencing and hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead
Yeah,
if you want to.
yeah, we can go ahead and dive into that, and I'll do my best. I'm no Andrea Parker, but I did take a lot of notes today, or Becky Wald. She's another one who does great notes. There was just a couple of us in the courtroom, and that was difficult. But we were able to talk to Darryl a little bit at the beginning. He was able to turn around and talk with us, and he did ask where people were at. And I said, there's some people outside. Hellboy was there. Dwayne Emmer showed up. It was so great to see him and give him a hug. I wasn't able to be at his sentencing the other day, and he was sentenced to a year just the other day for the refuge. So I'll just kind of go through my notes, if that's okay, kind of like Andrea does, and see how well I do. And then if you have questions, you can interject or raise your hand. Sometimes it's hard to hear when we're both talking. So Jason Patrick's attorney was in there. He was present, and so was David Fry's attorney. And, of course, we had a good connection with David Fry and his legal team, and so that was really nice to see him in there. Ethan Knight was the one who was speaking, and then Jeff Barrows was just sitting down. Gabriel was sitting in the back, but, you know, he didn't participate in the second trial. I was thankful to not have to hear his voice because some of I think we've got a little bit of post-traumatic stress syndrome after those trials of just listening to all the things. Before I get into this, I'll say all the things we witnessed in Oregon in the first two trials in Nevada, they're not happening this time in this trial. And that's why Ryan reading the Constitution is such a big deal. The jurors have been questioned after the trial, and the prosecution has been going to them saying, why did you not convict, or why did you convict, and what were some of the things we could change? And they asked him all sorts of questions. And in both trials, the same things came up. The juror members were offended that the Constitution was not allowed in the courtroom. So we've seen multiple times now how that has worked against the prosecution, and they usually learn. So in Oregon, they would not let Ryan Bundy even take his Constitution and admit it into evidence, is all he wanted to do in open court, and he was denied. And she said that the Bible and the Constitution would not be admitted into evidence on his behalf in this courtroom. The second trial in Oregon, of course, they were much more open and let the attorneys speak to a lot of what they wanted to speak to. But the unfortunate part was the four defendants didn't speak for themselves. And we know in the first trial in Oregon, almost every 5 of the 7 took the stand. And then they had more freedom in the second trial, but all 4 court-appointed attorneys, who I will publicly say were not representing their clients and did not do a good job at all for those 4, but they told them not to take the stand. Jason Patrick is a natural teacher. Had he taken the stand, and Darryl Thorne is very personable when he speaks. Jake Ryan, anybody can love him. Dwayne Emmer, you just feel his patriotism when you speak to him. Had these 4 defendants taken the stand in their defense, they would have had some of the opportunities that Ryan Bundy is having right now in Nevada. Because the prosecution learned in both trials, the first time they continued losing because of all of their suppression. And now they're trying to be a little bit more free. So that was available to these 4 in Oregon, but since they didn't take the stand, they weren't able to teach and to explain why they did what they did. So now I'll get into his hearing. Let's see. So we did have Leah and the gentleman who does the Bundy court sketches. And that was funny because we just saw them, of course, in Nevada. And Maxine was there with Oregon Live. Conrad was there with PBS. So when they started out, they went through all of the plea agreements and explained why the sentences were so much less that they were requesting for all the other defendants who pled guilty. They continued saying all of them had plea agreements, all of them accepted responsibility for their wrongdoing. And so they were granted leniency in what was being requested. Most of the hearings were trying to, it's a strange thing, there's like feedback on the radio, like somebody has a trucker's radio or whatever on here, but I'll just keep going and hope.
Do you have a TV on there maybe?
What's
do you
that?
have a TV on around you? Is there
No,
any TV or radio?
Oh, no, okay. Nothing. I'm back in my bedroom and there's nothing on. But anyway, so she continued saying everyone else ahead of time has agreed to the enhancement, but Darryl Thorne was contesting it. So they wanted to do the terrorism enhancement. He was contesting that. They wanted to give him a 5, which would have given him much more time. And so much of the hearing was spent with his attorney. I believe his name was Nelson. Darryl's gone through 3 attorneys, and it was really encouraging to listen to this man. His name was Nelson. And he fought tooth and nail. He was sharp. He had case law memorized. He had statutes and codes and regulations memorized. And everything the prosecution said, he stood up and was ready to fight. He was fighting, in my opinion, like Darryl was his son or his brother, and he wasn't going to let him go without a fight. I mean, polar opposite from what we just saw with Dwayne's attorney and what we saw during the trial itself. Darryl's attorney at trial virtually didn't speak, much like Greg Burleson's in Nevada, didn't speak. And this attorney today, hats off to him, to Nelson, because he did absolutely awesome, and he is, I'm sure, part of the reason that Darryl did not get the 30-month sentence. After they negotiated and discussed what the actual sentence guidelines should be, they put him at 18 to 30 months. I'm sorry, 18 to 27 months, and the prosecution was asking for 30. After all of the discussion, they said, we want 30, and they explained why. This attorney getting up and fighting the way that he did for Darryl made all the difference in the world. The judge stated that the law says if a weapon is possessed and it was used to threaten, then you have to increase it 3 levels, which they did do. And she said the evidence shows this was the case. You did, in fact, have a weapon use it to intimidate or threaten, which is so ironic because police and marshals and BLM have weapons that we feel intimidated by sometimes, and there's no charges brought. But Darryl just having his gun there meant he went up 3 points on his conspiracy charge because he had a weapon and apparently it threatened officers who were there. This was interesting, Dawn. She cited the Ed and Elaine Brown case as her reason for giving the terrorist enhancement. So
wow.
One of the supporters of Ed and Elena Brown, they were the tax evasion case where they just felt compelled to stop paying their federal taxes. It ended up being a 9-month siege of their house and a standoff.
I remember that. That was out east on the East Coast.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about it.
I remember.
There's so many cases.
Yeah.
I just have briefly heard about what they went through and that they're now spending life in prison because they didn't give the federal government money. I mean, how insane is that? I'm all for order and justice, but nobody belongs in a box because they didn't give the federal government tax dollars that they shouldn't be receiving anyway. That's just absolutely ludicrous. They're not a threat to the public, and here they are spending life in prison. So she brought up their case, and she cited the rulings on their case. And she said they had a friend that came, and that friend walked behind the camera multiple times, and he had a gun. And voluntary security, somewhat like Darryl, and so she said at the end, because his ruling applied, in order to get the terrorist enhancement, this was kind of interesting. The terrorist enhancement comes if the offense was intended to promote action against the government, if the offense was calculated to retaliate against the government, or if the offense was calculated to influence or alter the course of government operation. And she determined that because in the Brown case, his security was there to alter and intimidate the federal government on behalf of the Browns, and she compared that to the Hammonds. And she said that his intent of being there it was calculated, it was to influence or alter the course of the government's operations in setting the Hammonds free and turning the refuge over to the people. The things that were going through my mind as she's saying this about the government is things in the Declaration of Independence. And I just thought, I don't want a war, and I definitely don't want any bloodshed. But how can people that knows in the history it says that there may come a time, can I say these words I'm about to say, John?
Well, there's a lot of people are complaining here that there's so much static. They can't hear you hardly, but they can hear me. And every time you talk, the static picks up really bad. So I'm not for sure what it is, but they're saying that there's nothing, no static at all when I'm talking. So I'm not for sure what's happening there.
Weird. You know, let me see if it's a bathroom fan that's running that could be doing it. Hang on.
So hopefully we'll get this fixed here. And
okay, let's see. I had a bathroom fan running to kind of drown out my voice so that I didn't get interrupted. I hope that's better. I'm so sorry.
I can hear you really clear. I can hear you real clear myself.
Okay. So what was so interesting to hear, what it takes to receive the terrorism enhancement is essentially to be willing to overthrow your government in one form or another. To overthrow the government meaning to alter or abolish the government when it becomes tyrannical. And those words that I just stated were actually quotes from the Declaration of Independence. And so it's very perplexing to me, and I'm not promoting anything one way or another. I'm just saying it's perplexing to me that we have a government that says the Constitution is the law and you have a Constitution protected right for this and that, and our framers laid this and that out. But then, you know, I can hear just constant static. I have no idea why.
I'm not sure either. That's what they're saying. A lot of people are saying. Some people are saying it's better now. It's clear. People are saying now. So
okay, I can still hear it. I've never heard that before. It just sounds like I don't know, like a fan is on in my phone. But at any rate, so it's very clear that we're not allowed to challenge our government. We can't do anything to alter or influence our government. And I thought that was strange because that's a part of protesting. That's our goal when we protest, is to alter the direction that our country is going. When Martin Luther King Jr. protested, he didn't protest because he wanted to hear his own voice. He protested to alter to influence or alter the course of the government operation. And now when you're convicted of doing that, you get a terrorist enhancement. That's what our founding fathers did, and it's what they laid out for us as the people, being the fourth branch of government. So people are saying the static is coming back. I'm just going to keep going and hope that it works in the end. So anyway, she ended up, let's see. She said, okay, so Darryl Thorne's attorney stood up and he discussed, he challenged a lot of things that the prosecution was throwing at them. And he said, you're citing things that actually turned its back on Congress and added commentary to a law that Congress actually wrote in saying that no commentary was to be added to this law regarding the terrorist enhancement. And, making it very clear what terrorism is and what it isn't, and that they can't just add to it and now add this commentary that, well, it's terrorism against the United States, but it's also if you're trying to retaliate against the government or alter the government or change or influence the government. Because, he was trying to defend Darryl Thorne isn't a terrorist. He was trying to defend his countrymen. He wasn't trying to terrorize anybody. So he fought really hard for that. At one point, at the end of this, 2 hours in, Judge Brown, who I'll say I have so much more respect for now that I've witnessed Judge Navarro. Judge Brown, for anybody watching that doesn't know, is Oregon, and federal judge in Oregon, about to retire, sat on the Bundy case there, and Judge Navarro is Nevada. While I know that Judge Brown is very biased against the defendants, she at least carries herself in a respectful manner. She can complete a sentence. She can process, she can listen to the two sides and make her own decision, whereas Navarro just heavily depends on the prosecution to know what to do next. So I really did appreciate her today. However, she did make this statement that was a little offensive. She says, Mr. Thorne, you're probably wondering what all of this means. Let's see. You just want the bottom line, but these are all things we need to determine if there is clear and convincing evidence that would apply to your enhancement charges. So we will get back to you in a few minutes as to what all of this means. And, it just further shows that we are just stupid Americans at the end of the day in these court systems. The verbiage they use, the case law they use, the code, statutes, rules, laws, regulations are so over our head that if we just hire, a standard attorney, we're probably in trouble. Like, we have to actually spend extra tons of money on somebody who's sharp and is studying and memorizing this stuff to be prepared in court. And I just don't believe our founding fathers ever intended for us to be a people that couldn't represent ourselves, let alone be coherent enough to just understand what in the world is being discussed on our behalf. We literally cannot even understand what is being discussed on our behalf. And I just see that as a really, really big problem. And I would hope that most Americans out there also see that as a concerning problem. Whether you do or not, I don't know. But let's see. Okay, next page. So Darryl's attorney put together a history of him. He pulled up his doctor and had him present in the courtroom. And he made some statements that were really profound about Darryl. He really defended Darryl's past. And a lot of what he was defending was so much of what I said the other day in my live stream after I visited with Darryl Thorne and I talked about the family unit. I don't know if that attorney watched my video, but I felt at times he was quoting what I said, and hopefully it's just because he understands that with a broken home, you end up with broken people in the end. And he put together this profound video for the judge, and he included the doctor in it that moved Judge Brown. I mean, she said, "I am moved by what you've presented to me." She said he has gone through things that nobody should ever have to go through. And they were trying to compare the difference between him and Jake Ryan. At one point, his attorney said, this was kind of funny. His attorney brought up Jake Ryan, and he said, "When you speak to Jake and his family, you can almost smell the fresh pie in the window. His behavior and his conduct at the refuge was different from..." Sorry, phone call. His conduct and his behavior at the refuge was so different from Darryl's because his upbringing and his childhood was so different from Darryl's. Apparently Jared doesn't know we're live right now, so he keeps calling. He said he had written up a plan for Darryl regarding supervised release that would bring him rehabilitation. And then, of course, this was my favorite part, versus placing him in a cage for the next 3 years. And I loved how he laid out that putting Darryl in a cage for the next 33 months or 40 months with the terrorist enhancement wasn't going to help Darryl. And that at the end of that time, he was going to have to come back into society. And do we want him coming back into society as a healthy, restored person, or as just a convicted criminal felon who sat for 4 years in a federal prison and is now no better off than he was today? Especially because we know he's not an actual threat to the public. He's not out doing anything to harm. This isn't a rape case. This isn't an attempted murder case. Nothing like that. So his attorney really went to bat for him and really, I mean, I don't know how long he's been on the case. I don't think he's been on the case very long. But he really laid out who Darryl Thorne is and how Darryl's past caused him to say and do things at the refuge that were a little bit more aggressive than what you might have heard from somebody like Jake Ryan. But it wasn't because Darryl Thorne is this awful person. It's just that his upbringing as a past definitely lent him to do and behave in a way that is differently from somebody who grew up in a good home with a loving set of parents. And I want people to continue hearing that on our live streams, that family matters. It really does matter. In your home life, with your kids, it really does matter. So, Eth, wait, do you have any questions before I finish up this last?
So, no, someone asked if there was any restitution for Darryl. So I don't know if that's something you're going to cover or not, but I'll go ahead.
Yes, he does have $5,000 restitution that we'll work on as we will with all of the rest of them, because they all have restitution to come up with, and some are out and can work for that. Others are sitting in jail and cannot. Ethan Knight, John kept referring at one point to Darryl. Let's see. He kept referring to Darryl as Mr. Thorne the person. When he was discussing his conduct, he kept saying Darryl Thorne Mr. Thorne the person had conduct at the refuge. And I thought that was so weird because I'm not into all the sovereign citizen stuff, but we often hear how they'll say, you know, I am the person versus the, I don't know, what, corporation.
You know, the government has all this wordplay. and they play it the opposite, just like both sides do, and they pretend that Ryan Bundy, because Ryan Bundy was bringing some of this stuff up today, and this attorney that was on the stand knew what he was talking about and followed along with him. And he was saying, well, do you see the capital T in this? And he said, yes, I see that, and I know where you're going with that. And that witness just went right along. That's the difference between the government trying to put their thing in it as the person, and if a defendant's trying to. They want to ignore the defendant like he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Why would Ethan Knight say that? Darryl Thorne, the person at the refuge, did this and that, and Darryl Thorne, the person, this and that. Like, he wanted to make sure we understood we were talking about the person. I'm thinking, who else are we talking about when you say Mr. Thorne? We're talking about Darryl. But he definitely was differentiating between the two, and I never heard Ethan Knight do that in the previous 2 trials in Oregon. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Maybe there's something to it. I don't know. Anyway, he went on to explain when he was asking for the higher sentence that his presence was a threat to the community between his past criminal history and his role at the refuge. When people have a criminal record and they go to jail and they serve their time and they get out, that criminal record should not continue to follow them the rest of their life, in my opinion. If they have paid their debt to society and they've paid restitution and made something right with the victim, it's really offensive to me that here Darryl was increased 3 points because of his criminal record. Even though, so it's like you pay for the crimes, and then if you get in trouble again, you pay for those past crimes again in the next crime instead of just paying for that crime. And it kind of makes it feel like you can't ever get away from your past. No matter what you do, you're still going to have to pay another sentence for the crime you already paid a sentence for.
Well, they even do the same thing for pretrial. So for pretrial, when Ammon and Ryan Payne and Cliven were trying to qualify for pretrial, she put them on a point system over here in Nevada. And even if they got in trouble for a horse that got out, which was what Ryan Bundy had a horse that jumped the fence. We didn't find out the whole details there, but she was giving him points because of that being like a civil disobedience. And it disqualified him from getting out. Even your actions while incarcerated, waiting on trial, and you're not found guilty of nothing. It's really pretty strange.
It is,
how they use all this against you.
Especially if it's something that you've paid a debt for. You've gone to trial, like I said, you've paid for it. It's over. And now you end up in trouble again, and they say, well, you're going to serve more time because you got in trouble before and already served time. I just have a problem with that. I have a problem with a lot of the stuff going on in our justice system right now.
Before I forget there, the sovereign situation there, that was brought up today here in Nevada also. Ryan was trying to make a point whether there was people sovereign or under federal law or just state law or what. And first the lawyer that was on the stand, Mr. Petrie, said, no, everybody's pretty much equal, you know. And he said, well, what about, you said earlier in you testified to about the Indians that you've actually litigated for the federal government against some of the Indians. He said, well, yeah, they're sovereign. And he said it on record today that the Indians were sovereign. So they recognize certain races or certain people that are sovereign, but they want to tell you who is and who isn't.
Right. And they want to make you look crazy when you try to say, I'm not in your jurisdiction or I'm a sovereign citizen, and they make it sound bad. And I admit, to me, I haven't really understood it as well, but I'm starting to hear the same things you are in the court, realizing they acknowledge it too, but it's just on their turf. They determine who's sovereign and who isn't sovereign, and they determine who has a negative. Now, if you see a Native American who says, I'm sovereign in this country, or I'm a sovereign citizen, you know, maybe they have a dual citizenship, we don't look at them like they're crazy. We're like, oh, yeah, because you're Native American, so you're sovereign. You don't fall into the same jurisdictions as us, especially if you're out on the reservation. But we talk that way, or some of these other people in our community talks that way, and they just get mocked and made fun of. I don't know. It's not right. Let's see. So when the judge was taking into account how she was going to sentence him, she said that Mr. Thorne's personal background is at best appalling. that he has been through circumstances that are horrific in his childhood, that he brought those circumstances with him to the refuge. His attorney got up and spoke on that also, saying how differently he behaved because of his childhood and how important his childhood circumstances are. And when we're in a country where we say, well, you get divorced and you can have marriage look however you want it to look, or you can not even be married and have kids with all different men. And our government wants to say that's okay. Like they can give the stamp of approval, but then they themselves even recognize on the other end how destructive that is to the upbringing of a child.
Did we lose? Looks like I lost Kelli there all the way. She was trying to give an update on Darryl Thorne, and we'll see if she comes back on in just a minute. But Darryl Thorne ended up getting 18 months today over there in Portland for his stand at the refuge, and he is going to get time served. He's already incarcerated. Here a little while back, he had another hearing, and he ended up going back into prison while he was waiting on this sentencing. So he's already been incarcerated, and today he got sentenced to 18 months, and he will be continuing to serve that until that's up there. We'll see. Kelli just come back here, so we'll see if we can add her again here.